People say they can't hear me. From someone called... Okay, good. So everyone's okay now. I receive a broad range of questions from people. You got that person.
Okay, it's on the Bible forum. Tom posted on the Bible forum.
1 second, everybody. I deleted it.
And the link.
Terry. I will delete them all.
Okay, let me forward it. Can you forward it to her?
You can do it direct? Okay. Someone wanted just to get onto the group, so that we're just arranging that. I get a wide range of questions, and sometimes it's not that easy to decide which questions to address and which not to address. I still have a few questions unanswered, but I wanted to address in a very brief way a question that comes up often. And the question is about relationships, but it's not particularly about husbands and wives, although it's connected to that subject. So before I even address the question itself, I'm not sure how many of us have watched, I guess it depends where you're located, Elder Tess's second presentation today. She did her regular Sabbath presentation, Australian time it would have been, I think, 9:30, and then she did the second presentation, which was an international one, and that particular presentation, she was reviewing material that she has discussed in the past, recent past. And if I were just to use the title, The Apis Bull, I'm hoping most people here would be familiar with what I'm referring to. And of course, if you watch today's presentation, then you know exactly what I'm referring to. So the reason why I mention that is because it's connected to the question that someone has asked. When I say someone has asked, they ask specifically, but as I say, I do get this question quite often. So the reason why I've referenced you back to the Apis Bull study, I'm sure many of you have at least done some preliminary investigation on the Apis Bull. We would normally call it the golden calf, and what it refers to and how it impacted God's people. Elder Tess has done a really good job in explaining the effects of idolatry and how they had picked up that mindset from the Egyptians, and what they would do was explain God through a visual phenomena. We would call it an idol. So that's not such an unusual thing to do. And as she said, paraphrasing from Ellen White, after the Egyptian captivity, so that was point one, where they essentially picked up the habit or the idea of making idols that represented their God. And that was all, good and well. That was all fine. I mean the logic and the understanding, not the experience, of course. By the time you get to the Babylonian captivity, centuries later, Israel, God's people, are going to wise up. They're going to understand that idolatry really is the bane of their experience. And if we were to go to Isaiah 46, a chapter that I have, I particularly have addressed many times now, and I've addressed it from different perspectives. The reason why we tend to go to Isaiah 46 is because of verse 10, which is a study of the beginning and the end, Alpha and Omega, line upon line, Isaiah 28. Now, the reason why that is a really nice chapter to study is because it gives a reference point. And the reference point that it gives is, as you all know, this is the book of Isaiah. So to understand the reference point, the context, you need to know when Isaiah's ministry is occurring. And if I were to say, without going to the verses itself, because he tells you himself, just to name two kings, Hezekiah and Manasseh. So if we were to consider those two kings, Hezekiah and Manasseh, you would know that in classic movement language, that this would be the 723 era. This would be when the 10 tribes, Ephraim, Israel, become so engrossed in their idolatry, they get destroyed by the Assyrians. So I think we're all familiar with that history. You all know about the 2520. This is the history of Isaiah. So Isaiah 46 is a time period that is before what we would call the Babylonian captivity. And in this history, what God is going to do is he's going to compare the experience of God's people today, which is today for them, obviously, pre-Babylonian captivity, and he's going to compare that with a time period centuries before. And I'm going to argue it's the time period before the Exodus. And in one history, they live in Egypt, and in another history, they live in Israel. But the experience is the same. And that's the point I'm suggesting of Isaiah 46. As Isaiah is going to compare these two histories, and essentially he's going to tell you that there is no difference between the two. What he then goes on to explain is how God brought his people out of this idolatrous mindset, or out of Egypt, if we can equate the two. They're going to come out of Egypt, literally, and they're going to come out of this Egyptian mindset. That was what was God's will. And we know that was his will because at the golden calf experience, when they fall into that sin and Moses discovers it, this is why he is so harsh in his punishment, because they should already have known the dynamics or the context or the will of God with respect to, well, now we'll switch over to the Apis bull terminology. They should have already known that. And Isaiah 46 speaks not only comparing the two, but how God relieves them from that idolatry, pulls them out of idolatry in the Egyptian experience, and then he's going to compare that history with the history of the post-Babylonian captivity. And if you're all familiar with that study, at least the way I've approached it in the past, is that he will compare the ministry of Moses and the ministry of Cyrus. And it's a direct compare and contrast between the two. But not only does he compare and contrast the two, as they do two things, those two ministers, those two men, they pull God's people out of captivity, and they also destroy the captor. So they destroy the captor and they bring God's people out of captivity. They have a twofold role. That's Moses and Cyrus. But before that happens, Isaiah gives the backdrop of this idolatry. And I'm sure you're all familiar with it if you're even now looking at the first few verses of Isaiah 46. Talks about Bel and Nebo, etc. So this issue of idolatry is a significant one. So what I want to suggest is that Isaiah 46, to compare and contrast it to the Egyptian experience, that the thing that they were suffering with then, Apis bull, golden calf, is the same thing that they're suffering with now. They're in captivity, literally in Egypt, in the history of Moses, as we all know, and Isaiah's going to compare and contrast that to the history that is the pre-Babylonian exile. And this is the book of Isaiah, remember, and as I've already mentioned, the book of Isaiah is in the history that just precedes the captivity or the destruction of the 10 tribes by Assyria, and also the history just post that. So I'm hoping that we're all familiar with that. So when he compares and contrasts these two histories, Isaiah's going to use the terms Bel and Nebo. Elder Tess is going to refer to the Apis bull, and we have to take all of that dynamic and bring it into the history of ancient Israel pre-Babylonian captivity. So I'm hoping we can all understand what I've just laid out. So if I can get a couple of people just to assent to that, that you understand what it is that I've just described, what I've laid out. So as you're having a chance to respond, I'm just going to just really simply draw that out. So we have a line and we have two histories. I'm going to call it the Alpha and the Omega history. The first and the last. And this is Isaiah 46 verse 10. So I'm just going to call this Egypt, and I'm going to call this Babylon. Now, in Isaiah 46, they're not in Babylon. but he's going to refer back to a history when they are in Egypt. So I want us to see that. So here they're into idolatry, and here they're also in idolatry. And at the end of that idolatrous experience, Moses is going to come. And at the end of this experience, the captivity, Cyrus is going to come. So the reason why I mention that is because Elder Tess has laid out clearly who Apis was, or what he represented. And she's quite clearly, explicitly stated that this was a warrior god, a warrior king. And you can understand why in this history here, when it refers to the Omega history, why God's people would be interested in a warrior god. Because obviously this is the time period of the captivity by the Assyrians, the 10 tribes, and then into the Babylonian captivity. And what you need is a God that can protect you. So I'm hoping you can see the comparison between the two histories. So when the Israelites created the Apis bull, and they wanted this god to lead them back into Egypt, not only were they given to give this bull as an offering back to Egyptians, but it was also a god that would be able to protect them. Now, I'm sure Elder Tess has mentioned this, but I'm not sure if this has been the focus of her attention when she has done a study on the Apis bull. Because another aspect of this bull is that not only is it if I call it a god of war, a god of power, a god of strength, but it's also a god of fertility. It's also associated with creation, or the creator god, if I can say it that way. So it has two aspects. Not only is it the god of, I'm going to call it the god of war, warrior god, but it's also a god of fertility, a god of creation. Now, I want to focus on this second aspect of what the Apis bull represents. It's this god of fertility. Now, if you we'll go to the Bible first, and we would be in Exodus chapter 32, and we'll begin with verse 4. Exodus 32 verse 4. Now, we're going to start by seeing one aspect of this God. Exodus 32 verse 4. This is speaking about Aaron. And he, Aaron, received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool. And when it says he received them at their hand, this is their jewelry that is brought to view in verse 3. So all the people broke off their earrings, which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. So they all give to him their jewelry. Verse 4, he receives them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it a golden calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. So 2 points I wanted to see. First of all, it's gods in the plural. So there are these gods that have brought them out of Egypt, not a singular god, not just the Apis bull god, singular, but this is gods in plural. And the second point I want us to see is that it's these gods that brought them out of the land of Egypt. So I just want to see if I can find another reference. If I can't, I'll skip over it. I won't be long. If I can't find it, I'll skip the point I want to make. So I want to drop back. If you keep your hands in Exodus 32, I think we are, go back to Exodus 14. I want us to go back to Exodus 14. Give you a moment to find it. So Exodus 14, we'll probably read the next one as well. This is Numbers 33. So I've got Exodus 14 and I've got Numbers 33. I'll give you the verses in a moment. Exodus 14, Numbers 33. So we'll go to Exodus 14 and I'm in verse 8. Exodus 14 verse 8. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with a high hand. Now, if we were doing a study, maybe even someone might want to answer this, what would be the most important word in this verse? Now, if you've heard me ask those questions before, you know that you have to modify that rule, William Miller's rule, and perhaps someone can actually tell us what that rule is. Not just to say every word must have its proper bearing upon the subject, but, thank you, someone's found it, but it's not, I don't use that rule that way, and I don't recommend people use that rule just to say every word must have its proper bearing. Bearing means direction or importance. I want to say in any particular study, in any particular passage, there is a word that gives bearing or direction to the subject matter at hand. So in this verse, what is the important word, the word that has the most bearing? What do we think in Exodus 14:8? Does anybody have a thought? So, good. I'm going to go with we'll go with Brother Leon's high hand. I don't want to. It's not the word hand. I'm going to suggest it's the word high, not hand. But you can put them together. So I don't want to nitpick on that. It's the high hand. So if you go to, I think I said Numbers 33. This is Numbers 33, verse 3. Numbers 33 verse 3. And they departed from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, on the morrow after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with an high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. So it is hand, but I want us to see that it's going to reinforce this understanding of hand with a high hand. So what would a high hand be as opposed to just a hand? What would people say that a hand is? So as you give me your answers, I'm going to read verse 4 to you. For the Egyptians buried all their firstborn, which the Lord had smitten among them. Upon their gods also the Lord executed judgments. So what is this high hand? Good, power. We'll go with power or mighty. So it's not just a hand, it's a high hand, which means a really powerful hand. Now, in the context of killing people and destroying their gods, we all know what a high hand is. What kind of a god can do that? What kind of a god can have a high hand? Would it be a soft, meek god? Or would it be a warrior god? So we all know the answer to that. Obviously, a warrior god. An almighty warrior god. Good. So when you go back to Exodus 32, we're in Exodus 32, Aaron says to them, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." So I hope we can see that the way you bring out people from Egypt is how. So, who's asked that? I'm going to try to slow down. I've got the name. Aaron says, the Apis bull, is the Apis bull singular or plural, by the way? Singular, good. But he doesn't say that, he says gods. So I want us to keep that in the back of our minds. We may not get to that this week, but I want us to keep that in the back of our minds. He says gods, but an Apis bull is a singular god. So it's these gods, Apis bull, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And how did he do that? If you go to Exodus 14, Numbers 33. He did that, good, with a high hand, with force, with power. So, just want us to be sure that this whole idea about the Apis bull that Elder Tess has been explaining to us is correct. You can show it straight from inspiration that it's a god of force, a warrior god. A god that has power, that is able to do this work for them. Verse 5. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord, a feast to God. Now, this God is whom? Which God is this? It's not the Egyptian God. It's not the god Apis. This is Jehovah. It's the true God. But it's now going to be represented in the best way that they can, because they want to honor him. And the way they're going to do that is through creating a deity or an image, which has to be the Apis bull, the warrior god. But I've already said that Apis has two connotations. It's this warrior god, and we can call it the creator god, or the god of fertility. Verse 6. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. So it's which word stroke phrase is the most important in verse 6? Who wants to venture a guess, or hopefully an educated guess? We're in verse 6, Exodus 32, verse 6. What is the key word, most important word, Miller's Rule 1 in this passage? Okay, so I'm going to go with play. So a couple of people got that. Brother Tom, Sister Anna, Sister Justina. It's the word play. I want to go with the word play. So hold your fingers in Exodus 32 verse 6. And let's now go to Genesis. I'm going to go to the book of Genesis. So I'll type this one out so we can, it's there for us. Genesis 26 verse 8. Genesis 26 8. Hopefully I've given you the right one. Yes, it's the right verse. So I'm going to give people a moment to read it themselves. We're in Genesis 26 8. I'm going to ask the same question. Tell me what, using Miller's Rule number 1, what is the key word here? I've changed the key word. It's the most important word. Which word has bearing upon the subject that we're discussing? Okay, good. Everybody can see that really easily. Excellent. Now, what you need to do is you need to go back to the Hebrew to connect the words. But in fact, you didn't, because you can I don't know how many people everyone's getting sporting, which is the correct word. Now, if you go back to the Hebrew, this is H6711. I'll type that in, 6711. And it's the same Hebrew word for play and for sporting. They're the same word. Now, if you look at the word itself, it's a pretty benign word. Nothing evil or bad about it. But it has a certain context, just like many words do, depending upon the situation. So if this was the Olympics, you could use this word. If you went to a comedy show, you could use this word. So you can use this word as sports, an Olympiad. You could do it at a comedy show. You can see children playing around in the back garden, just doing childish things, riding a bicycle. You can use this word for that too. But if you go to Genesis 26 verse 8, what word is this? What word would you substitute for sporting? Good, we got that really quick. Well done, Sister Victoria, you were fast. Flirting, that's exactly the word I was thinking of. So, we're going to change the word sporting to flirting. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, behold, Isaac, that's the person who's been there a long time, was flirting with Rebekah, his what? Rebekah, his what? What's the word? Not wife. Rebekah, his what? Who can give the correct answer? Good. Rebecca, his sister. This is where problems begin, because you can play badminton or some kind of sport with your sister. There's no problem with that, is there? Of course there isn't. Why does Abimelech, depending on what we want to say, get upset, get suspicious, begin to think something's gone funny, when Isaac is sporting or playing sports with his sister Rebecca? It's because that sport that he's playing there, in the words of Sister Victoria, is what? Flirting. He's flirting with his sister. And everybody knows it's wrong to do that. So Abimelech says, how comes he's flirting with his sister? This does not seem correct. And of course, what's the problem? Because she's not his sister, it's his wife. And it's perfectly acceptable to flirt with your wife. Now, as I say, this word can be used in different ways. So you have to be able to get the context. Now, I've given you the context in Genesis 26 verse 8. It's clear to see that's what that context is. Now, when you pull that word in its context in Exodus 32 verse 6, because now we're going back to Exodus 32 verse 6, now it says they're going to eat and drink and they're going to rise up to play. They're not going to rise up to play a game of football or badminton or volleyball or something, or some kind of sport. What are they rising up to do? Good. We'll go with the naughty stuff. Someone says they're going to go up and they do the naughty stuff. Okay, so I like, it says do the deed, flirt, naughty stuff, and Brother Emmanuel just says sex. So we'll go with any one of those four: sex, the naughty stuff, do the deed, flirt, to know each other. Good. So whether or not they actually have intimacy, I'm sure some of them did, the whole scenario is a sexually provocative experience. Now, why are they doing that? Is it just because they sat down to eat and they had some drink, and we might infer that this was an alcoholic drink, that they got drunk? It doesn't explicitly say that. Why would they end up flirting with each other? So we've already explained the reason, because this is not a sexual orgy. That's why I want us to be clear on this. This is not a sexual orgy. This is an act of worship. And many people are, in the chat are all saying the same thing. It's the god of fertility, the Apis bull, and what it means. It's part of the idolatrous worship system. It's what they learned from Egypt. It's the god of fertility. Good. This is what I want us to see. They're not getting into this intimacy with one another. There's no regard for familial relationships. These are not husbands and wives. These are not just married people. These are single people. There's no thought of human relationships. All they're doing is following the rules of worship. That's what I want us all to see. So when we were in verse 4, this was Apis, the god of war. I'm going to call it the god of war. That may not be a technically accurate term. The god with a high hand. And by the time you get to verse 6, it's the god of fertility. The god who brings about creation. So someone says that the SDA Church teaches it's an orgy. Now, I don't want to make it look or sound ugly. I'm not saying that it isn't. I want us to understand it in its, if we can say its historical context, if we can use that kind of phraseology. This is an acceptable service. This is okay to do because you're not going out and just playing around with your neighbour's wife or your neighbour's husband. You're not married and visiting a single woman. What we're seeing here is part of a ritual service. It's completely acceptable. And at the end of all this, everyone would go back to normal life, if you like, if we can say it that way. The next day, the woman that you may have flirted with, you can't do that same thing with her in the marketplace. The man that you slept with, perhaps, during this service, a week later, you wouldn't go and sleep with them. It would be totally respectable behaviour, normal behaviour. This is a worship service, and I want us to be clear on that, if you're okay with that. So I don't want to trash this or trivialize it, or hopefully this doesn't trouble you. I don't want to demonize the people. They don't have a choice but to do this. If you're going to follow Apis, this is how you do it. No, it's clear. If we were to go to, if you all went on a holiday to the Middle East, or say to Turkey or somewhere like that, and you wanted to go, or Jerusalem, and you wanted to go to a mosque, just to visit that as a tourist resort, then you know that you would be expected to follow some rules. One of the things that they would ask you to do would be to take your shoes off. That's clear. And you'd probably have to cover your head. And you would do that because you know that's normal operating procedure in that environment. And whilst I don't want to trivialize what they're doing, I also don't want to demonize it. So I'm saying it's part and parcel of the worship service. If we can all hold on to those two thoughts. So it's particularly the second one, that they rise up to play, that this is connected to fertility and creation. So if we've got all those thoughts in our minds, I want to move on. So you remember in verse 4 that it says, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." Why does it go from a singular god, Apis, to many gods? Why does it go from a singular to plural? So I want to just address this. Now, addressing this is not so straightforward. It's a bit esoteric, but it is correct and true. So before I explain that, so someone has said this is the mystery religion, and I'm going to go with that mystery. I'm going to go with that concept of mystery religion. This is Brother Richard has said this is the mystery religion. Now, if you want to hold to that idea, the mystery religion, what I want to say, perhaps not today, but in maybe the next presentation, if we don't finish, because I don't think we're going to finish this thought, is what is this mystery religion that I'm not asking Brother Richard specifically, but I think you all know what he means. What is this mystery religion? How does it operate? And how evil or bad is this? So the reason I'm going to explain this perhaps in a different way. I'm not going to use the word mystery religion moving forward. I'm going to use a different phrase later on, but I just want to go with this. So now we've switched to paganism. Now the reason why, so you don't have to give any more guesses. The reason why this is important is because if I were to ask you, do you participate? Have you bought into the mystery religion or paganism, which is the terminology that Brother Richard has given? Have we bought into this? Do we practice this type of religion, the mystery religion, the paganism religion, or nature worship? So all three terms have been given by Brother Richard: nature worship, mystery religion, paganism. Have we bought into that? We, this movement, Adventists in the 21st century. And what I'm going to say is, unfortunately, I don't think Elder Tess has brought us out of this in 2014. Elder Tess wasn't here in 2014 for one thing. So what I want to say is that we believe we may be free from the mystery religion. But I want to suggest that the mystery religion is alive and well in Adventism, and it's also alive and well in the hearts and minds of members in this movement. To what degree, everyone has to figure out for themselves. To what extent, I want to say it's widespread. So, let's just summarize some thoughts, some points that we've made. This is the Apis bull, the Apis god. This god has two representations. One of them is war. He has a strong, mighty hand. And the other one is the god that creates, or the god of fertility. This god is one person, Sakar. But even though it's a singular entity, it represents gods in the plural. So, if I can say it this way, you've all heard the maybe you have not all heard the term. It's an English term, at least in the UK. You get, when you go shopping, often they do you a special deal, and they say you get two for the price of one. I don't know if you've all heard that expression when you come to shopping. You get two for the price of one. They don't say half price. They don't want to call it half price. In fact, they don't let you buy the thing for half price. What they want you to do is buy two of them, which is obviously a marketing technique. So they say two for the price of one. And that's what I want to suggest you're going to get with Apis. You're going to get two gods for the price of one god. So the one god is Apis, and you're going to get a second god attached to this god. So, I think I've summarized all that we've got to so far. And I've asked what kind of experience this, or what kind of religion this is, and someone said this is the mystery religion, paganism, nature worship. And then I asked the question, are we still engrossed in this religious practice of the Apis bull? And if you were to just follow on through Elder Tess's presentations, I think you'd all say, sure, yes. But I want to be quite specific about at least the point I want to bring up from all of this. So, I want to ask a specific question, but I need to check something first. Okay, so I don't want everybody to answer this question. I want only one stroke two people to answer this question. They're together. So this is Sister Charity and Brother Blessing. They are in the group. There are participants in here. So I want only them to answer this question if they are willing to do that. Okay? So I just need to get them to assent that they are with me and they're listening before I ask the question. So if you can just say, yes, you're here, you're listening. Good, they're there together. So, Dan and I have been talking, I don't mean like we've had loads of studies, we had a conversation about this subject, this issue. So my question is, there's this warrior king, this god. His name is Apis. But Aaron knows when you create the warrior king, he doesn't come on his own, one person. When you create him, he comes as a package deal, gods. So this is not a name I'm looking for. So I'm not looking for a name. What I am asking, Brother Blessings to Charity, is who comes along with the warrior king, with this bull? Who comes along with him? I'm not looking for a name, but there's something else that has to attach with him. And who or what is that? That's my question. I'm not looking for the Egyptian name, so don't start panicking that you don't know the name of the god. So this is okay. Good. Never mind, Brother Curtis. Thank you. It's the wrong answer anyway, because that's Apis. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Tar or something. I don't know. That's Apis. I want to know who comes with him, and this is for Brother Blessing, Sister Charity. If you're not sure, don't panic. Just tell me you're not sure. Okay, they're thinking. So you got to think back to our communication. Okay, so the answer is fertility. So I'm going to change that term, fertility, because if you've got a warrior king, what do you need to have fertility? What does the king need? Good. He needs a woman in his life. So, I want us to understand the dynamic of what I'm suggesting here. If you buy Apis, what do you get with him? You get his partner with him. She comes for free. Now, this is a phenomena of idolatry. This is not something that's unique. When you start having this male god, this warrior god, he can't be on his own. He'll get lonely. He needs to have his desires met. He needs to have a partner in his life, especially if he's the god of fertility. The god who is we might call it a man's man. You know, all that ugly bravado, all that ugly, someone would call it toxic masculinity. We can use that phrase. So when you get this gods, now you've got a man and a woman, Can we see why they're going to rise up to play? Hopefully we can now see what they're doing is, in essence, mimicking this, I don't want to call it idolatrous relationship, because it's a godly relationship between these two gods. They mimic it through this act, and it's all worship. So I'm hoping we've all got together up to this point. Now, what I want us to at least consider, if you don't want to accept this, now you think you are free from paganism, nature worship, and the mystery religion. You think you're free from all of that. And I want to suggest that you're not. So can someone give me a sanitized version, a sanitized model of this form of existence or worship? Sanitized, the only thing that can sanitize anything is Christianity, by the way, is God. No, sanitized. Sensuality would not be sanitized. Sensuality is anti-Christian. I want a sanitized version of this. I'll rephrase it, a Christianized one. So sensuality would not be a Christianized version, not the word SDA. Okay, so now we're coming up with silly answers. We can't say, I'm not even going to read this one. Richard, you can't do that. That's not right. Okay, so I'm going to type out the answer. So if you didn't come to our class, you're going to miss the answer now, because I've typed it out. I'm not going to say it. How about that? Everyone who missed out on this presentation. So I'm suggesting that this is the Christianized, sanitized version of what they are doing here. And so I want to say this idolatrous model is alive and well right in the midst of Christianity. My question is, this modeling of God, the one God, the one true God, Apis, the true God, when you create him, when you conjure him up, he doesn't come by himself. He comes with a partner. The partner is feminine because he's masculine. They come together. Okay, someone says he's not the true God. I know he's not the true God. We have to live in a parable world. If we don't understand the parable, then we don't understand the real. I'm not saying Apis was the true God. I am saying he was the true God in his representation as the Israelites understood him. Elder Tess has said explicitly that you and I worship the Apis bull today. And if we're worshipping the Apis bull today, what we're actually worshipping is the true God, but he's not the true God as he really is. He's the true God as represented by the Apis bull. So, when you create that God, what comes with him is the feminine counterpart. So you have male and female. They have a relationship one with another. You cannot have one without the other. So Brother Blessing, I'm sure you remember that discussion that we had. And the reason why I asked him that question was because it was something that came up in a study that he and I were discussing over. And even though it wasn't about this particular issue, it ties back to this very issue about the Apis bull. And what I want to do is not to just take this as this isolated concept of these pagan people who have this wicked model of a male and a female god. What I want us to see, that the model of headship is that same modeling. It's just been Christianized, sanitized. So there you are. For those people who weren't here, I said the word headship. I'm saying the headship model is a Christianized version of paganism. If you want to do it the other way round, because what comes first? Idolatry or the true God? Who was here first? We all know the answer to that. I'm not even going to wait for an answer. The true God. Everything else is a copy of him. I'm not going to call it a copy. I'm going to call it a mockery of the true. Now, a mockery of the true doesn't make it, please don't give me a correction on this, a mockery of the true doesn't make it less true. I'm not saying the false is true, but what I'm saying is, if it's modeled upon the true, there must be some truth in it. Otherwise, we'll use that word, the falsification of the truth. But if it's a model of the truth, an image of the truth, a copy of the truth, there has to be truth there. So where did they get this idea? When you create the Apis god, you have to create his partner. Where did they get that from? They got that from, I'm just going to call it Christianity. Christianity doesn't exist. It's whatever you want to call the church in that dispensation. They get this from God, from God's kingdom, from God's modeling, from the church. Basically, from Adam and Eve. So all of this is taken from the Adam and Eve model. Now, today, when we start thinking about what people would call the mystery religion or paganism or nature worship or this evil stuff that these people are doing, we have to remember that they did not invent this. They did not get this from, they didn't invent it by themselves. They didn't get it out of thin air. They got this from the true religion. So what I want us to see is that the religion that we have, which is connected to men and women, and the religious practices that we have, is just a representation, or is being represented, I might say, by these idolatrous religions. There's very little difference between the two. Now, depending on which religion you want to go to, if you want to go to Ashtaroth or Diana, who rules? Who's the boss? I'm not sure who iPhone J Buff is, but in that form of idolatry, the women rule. But in this form of idolatry, the Apis bull, the men rule. It's always people vying for power. But what I want us to see is the interaction between men and women. Now this becomes significant because you have to remember what is the head and what is the tail. Where do things come from and where do things end up? So there is the true God, and he creates Adam and Eve, man and woman, male and female, in his image. So the question you want to ask yourself, what is God? Is God a man? Or is God a woman? Or is God half a man and half a woman? Or is he both? What is God? Man or woman? I'm not asking for any answers, so please don't answer my question. These are rhetorical questions. In the parable, we know the answer. In the parable, it's Adam and Eve. So in the parabolic, in the natural, it's two human beings, male and female. They join together and become one flesh, which is a representation of God. I don't want to go into the details of what that means or what it looks like or what it's supposed to portray. But what I do want to say is when it comes to idolatry, where did those idolatrous practices come from? How were they invented? And I want to say they were invented or modeled based upon humanity. If you go to passages such as Isaiah 46 that we've already mentioned, they create these idols in whose image? They essentially create them in the image of humanity, or as people have said, in their own image. And if you're going to create idols in your own image, what kind of idols will you be forced to have? If you're going to create them in your own image, what kind of idols will you have? Anybody? Good. You'll have, it's not just ones that look like ourselves, not just man-like. Genesis 1:27, Brother Tom has given us. You'll have male and female. Good. You'll have a male and female God. You have to do that because these idolatrous models are based upon humanity. You can go to Romans chapter 1. Paul discusses this. So that's why you have all this male and female modeling. Now, we can talk about the male and female, but we can look at it from another perspective. We can look upon it as the sun god. All the different religions have their own names. So if the sun god is the premier powerful god, which would be the man, what would his counterpart be? The sun is the man. What's the counterpart? Good. The moon woman. Excellent. So you've got the sun and the moon, and you can begin to see how ugly all of this looks. If you go to Revelation 12, what modeling is that? What modeling is being used there? What's the woman standing on? Revelation 12, what's the woman standing on? The moon. Why would a woman stand on the moon? We all can begin to see the problem now. Much of inspiration, remember, the book of Revelation, this is not a study on Revelation 12. I'm not trying to look at all the symbology. There's good symbology there. But I want us to see what the modeling is about. This is the last book. This is the most refined, the most modern book in the Bible, the book of Revelation, 100 AD-ish. And look what the modeling has. It has women standing on moons because they're a reflection of whom? Of men. They're the lesser light. If you're a lesser light, what does that make you? Lesser. How ugly is that? How ugly is it if you want to tell women that they're lesser than men because they're just a reflection of the sun? Inferior, unequal, less important. All of this imagery is all the same imagery that pagan religions have taken on board. And I want to say they didn't invent it. So before we start slapping these people around saying they're pagan or they got mystery religion and we are clean, I want to remind us that they got all of that from us. And what did they get from us? That women are less important than men. They don't have their own glory. They stand in the shadow of men. They're just a reflection of what men are. In fact, if a woman is going to be glorious, who's the only person that can make a woman glorious? Because they can't be glorious in their own right, can they? A man can only do that. Can we begin to see how... No, not Jesus. I can't accept Jesus as the correct answer, Brother Richard. It's not Jesus. It's man. Sister Daisy, a guy. Good. They can only get their self-worth, their glory from a man. All of this idolatrous imagery that we have here is all borrowed from the model that I call headship, the headship model. Sexism. If you can begin to see the significance and the depth of the Apis bull problem, it goes far beyond toxic masculinity, that you have men who have this bad image, that we all have idolatry in some shape or form in our lives. It's quite specific. And what it's relating to with respect to this particular study that I want us to understand is the model of headship and how it has impacted. We'll just go with this movement because they're the really, it's us that we're really interested in. So what I want us to understand is that this Apis bull subject or study takes us to the model of headship, which takes us to the subject of equality and the idolatry, or as Elder Tess might call it, apostate Protestantism, that people in the movement have bought into, that they already had way before they even joined the movement. This lifestyle that we all led is all connected to this subject of, which is represented by the Apis bull model. So I want us to all understand that and its significance. So this was an introductory thought to some, perhaps some, maybe just one or two questions that relate to this subject of how men and women and their relationship one with another interact together to create family units, and how family units are constructed and how they operate and work together. So the Apis bull study isn't just we're taking on right-wing conservative apostate Protestantism. This is not just the fact that we understand this idea that it's ruled by strong white male figureheads. It's much more than that. This is the idea that headship is an appropriate way to have society function, an appropriate way to have families ordered and structured. And what I want us to see is, whether or not you assent to this or not, many of us, far too many of us, have not eradicated this headship model. I want to call it this idolatrous model, this wrong model. I'm not saying we got it from idolatry. I'm saying the idolatrous religions got it from us. And if they got it from us, we can see that whatever, if you want to learn something about the headship model, you can learn it straight from this idolatrous practice. And they can learn it straight from us. So it's a symbiotic relationship between them and us. They can learn from us and we can learn from them. You can have the counterfeit teach you the truth. We know that. That's why the story or the study of Fatima is so important, even though that study has remained static for some time, to be resurrected, Lord willing. The reason why it's so important is because the counterfeit can teach you about the truth. In fact, we know that because the subject or the stories of the King of the North, the King of the South, how they war, how they react one with another, can teach us about our own behavior, our own necessary conduct, the way we should conduct ourselves. So we know that the Force can enlighten us upon how the truth should work. So what I want us to see is that this model of headship or inequality or sexism is the same issue that's been addressed here in the Apis Bull study. And so whether or not we start talking about dowry or headship or any of the other spin-off concepts or models that are brought to view based upon this perspective, all of this is being brought forth from the worship of the Apis Bull. And after today, after this introductory study, if I can say it that way, I'm hoping that you can all see that the Apis Bull is alive and well, if not in all of us, in many of us. Because in that history, it wasn't just the men that were playing around, it was the women. The men and the women were doing this together. They were in concert, they were in cohort one with another. Therefore, you know that the problems with our relationships, one with another, men and women, is equally problematic between the men and the women. And I don't mean to say that they're equally guilty. That's not the point I want to make. But what I want us to see, that we have to be careful, all of us, that we don't buy into these ideas, these models that are reflected in idolatrous practices. So, for those of us who said that this is nature worship or paganism or the mystery religion, I want us to hopefully see that what we're actually discussing is conservative Adventism, the type of Christianity that you and I are both practicing and engaging in our day-to-day practices. If you remember, just from that simple diagram, there's going to take a man that comes out from the east, a person who comes from a distant land, that's going to do two things. That's going to take his people out of captivity and they're going to destroy the captor, destroy Babylon, destroy Egypt. We had these two histories there. It's going to happen the third time, and if you're familiar with the studies that I've done on this subject, we know that these two men, Cyrus, the anointed one, and Moses, who was faithful in his house, are all symbols or representations of Jesus. And what that's telling us is that you and I are practicing this Apis Bull religion in our relationships one with another. the perspective that men have of women and women have of men, by and large, is warped, distorted, and wrong. So we can call it apostate Protestantism. And you and I think, well, we separated from that last September when we cut off ties with FFA, when we understood the role of the Trump presidency in prophetic history. You might think that now we've got 2 women elders in the movement and counting, that we have arrived, that we've got many women who are in leadership positions, everything is good. What I want us to see that things are not good, this movement is not in a good place, that sexism runs deep at far too many levels. We have men in our movement, husbands, brothers, uncles, whatever you want to call them, whatever familial relationship title you want to give them, in far too many ways they are still dictating and controlling the lives of the women with whom they interact, women who are in their lives. I see it far too often in the movement, how men, sometimes in a gross fashion, sometimes subtly, still control and manipulate the conduct, the activities, the freedoms of the women in their families, whether it's their sisters, mothers, wives, or daughters. And those practices then spill over into the movement. We have men who think they have a right to interrogate or view the female people in their homes, their phone activity, that they think they have a right to access their private data, their private information, to control how money is used in their homes, in a way that they would never allow their spouses to have, their wives or the females in their family, they would never allow them to have that level of control over them. Now, I know many people have good intentions on this issue, but I want to give one example in the movement that has, I think, exemplified this problematic issue that we have. A few years ago, when we were setting up organizations in the movement, we had secretaries and presidents, etc. And no one blinked an eye when they were all men. Everything was all fine, everything was all good. But now it's come to the consciousness of this movement that modeling can no longer continue, that we have to have women in leadership positions. You'll notice, I've noticed this, a phenomena has arisen. What has happened now that we've had women in leadership position? When you look at organizational structures in our movement, what have you begun to notice? Maybe someone can type out an answer. Maybe you have noticed what I've noticed. Resistance, yes, not that. Jealousy, yes, not that. It's subtle. Resistance is not subtle. Jealousy is not subtle. I'll type out the answer. Lots of disagreements, yes. So I want to suggest one of the spin-offs from having leaders in women in leadership positions is that everywhere now we want to have co-chairs. Oh, no one saw their answer. Oh, the reason they didn't see, yeah, sorry, it went private. Someone linked me onto private. Someone shifted me. Who did that? Co-chairs. We seem to have a lot of co-chairs in our movement nowadays, and to me, that seems to be a consequence of having women leaders. So you put women in leadership positions, and straight away everybody wants to have co-chairs. Why is that? Why do we want to have co-chairs? People don't know what a co-chair is. A co-chair is someone who has a chair. We wouldn't call it a chair, we would call it a throne. So a throne is a ruler, someone who sits on a chair rules. So co-leadership, good, we've had co-leadership. A partnership. I'll try to slow down a bit. So as soon as we have women in leadership positions, we seem to have this prevalence that if you have a woman leader, we should put a chair in there or someone to sit next to them to hold their hand, because of course women can't handle themselves and know how to behave properly. So all of this is all Apis bull theology. So if you have women in leadership positions and you're trying to get co-leaders in there, whatever justification you want to give for that, I'm saying this is Apis bull theology. Because when you had men leaders there was no arguing that we need to help them a bit and put someone with them to help them do their job. Never looked at that. It never looked at things in that way. Another phenomenon that happens so often, because many of our male leaders are failing in their job. Is that too hard a saying, my brothers? It's true, unfortunately. Many of our male leaders are failing. So I'm going to blame Elder Tess on this one, because she's not here to defend herself. Elder Tess will tell men, those male leaders, in straight, unvarnished language, that they are incompetent. She often says it a lot nicer than that. So when you tell all these male leaders they're incompetent, do you know what they want to do? That they don't want to smile. They don't want to smile. When you tell them they're incompetent, what they end up doing is saying, well, I'll tell you what, I'll step down and we'll put a woman in my place. So this is another technique, another consequence of the Apis bull theology. You tell men off for doing a bad job, and they say, well, okay, I'll step down. False humility. No, it's not thrown in the towel. Thrown in the towel. This is false humility. Passive aggressive control. I like that. That's exactly what it is. Yes, I don't fully understand what that means, but it sounds good. Passive aggressive control. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. They want to step back and say, okay, let the women have a go. And the reason they do that is because they want the women to fall on their face and fail. All of this is Apis bull theology. It's all headship, sexism, inequality. So I want us to see, and I'm hoping that all of our male leaders don't all go into a depression now and a huff and a moan and say, no, they're all failures or whatever. If you identify yourself as that, improve. Don't say you're going to leave and say, oh, I'll leave, I'll get a woman to do a better job than me. That's not what I want to, that's not why I even mentioned this. I'm giving examples of what I wanted to help us to see was not the whole of the Apis bull study. Elder Tess has had her own perspective, her own study on what she wanted to derive from that subject. This is only a part of that. It's a perspective that I wanted us to see. I've given a few examples of where we are failing in our movement. We should have competent male leaders who implement equality correctly. But if they're not doing it properly and they and it gets identified, for them to say, well, I'll step back and be humble and get someone else to take their place, that is not the response of true leadership, if I can call it true, no, I'll just call it true leadership. This is falling into this same trap. Well, if I can't do it, get a woman to fail instead of me. There's no denying that this movement is in a difficult place. There's no denying that the work ahead of us, even in the present, is difficult. I'm not trying to castigate or ridicule our male leaders. All of us are coming into this issue from a very difficult upbringing, a very difficult background. All of us are, whether we're male or female. So what I want to encourage people is, if you're not doing well in your ministry and it gets identified, and if you're in a leadership position, you know Elder Tess is one of the most gentle and nicest people. She does it really well. No one ever gets told off. But if you do feel that your work is being critiqued, don't take the position of saying, well, I'll walk away and let someone else do that job, because the job is not easy. And what we're not trying to do is get rid of men and replace them with women, because all of that, as I've said, is part of this idolatrous modeling, which we should not be entering into. Equality is not easy to work out. It's not easy to put into practice, both at an organizational level or in your families, as brothers, friends, sons, fathers, uncles, cousins. All of those relationships are not easy to engage with and to implement properly when it comes to equality and sexism. So I'm hoping that today's introductory thoughts on the Apis bull have been food for thought for you. That if you've felt that because you were not swept away with the FFA apostasy, and Elder Tess correctly identified even today that they had held on to apostate Protestantism, if you feel, well, I escaped all of that and therefore I have succeeded in some shape or form, I want you to know that we are all still not only in danger, like there's some threat to come upon us, we're already still entrenched, many of us, in the same idolatrous practice. And whilst Elder Tess may not have been focusing upon this particular aspect, that's what I wanted us to pick up in this study of family relationships. Now I've spoken about organizational issues, but I really want us to see how this impinges and impacts upon the way our families are ordered, how our relationships work. Whether you're married, whether you're courting, whether you have children, whether you have parents, whatever familial relationships you have, this impacts all of that, whether you're male or female. So next week, I want to use this idea that we've spoken about to explain some of the dilemmas, some of the problems that confront us today as we deal, we try to answer some of the problems that families are being faced with, families in this movement, and how we should deal with some of these issues. And as always, I think we might have some surprises in store for us. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, Lord, I normally ask thanks for your goodness and mercy towards us. But today, Lord, I kneel before you on behalf of myself and my other brothers and sisters to seek for forgiveness. Lord, each of us started this journey in a worse place than we are today. And yet when we look upon ourselves, when we're confronted with this idolatrous theology called, in the words of Elder Tess, the Apis bull, when we see how this ideology, these practices are impinging upon us at this very moment, that these thoughts and ideas are affecting our relationships, and that we are not only immune from them, but we have not even desired to escape from them. We want to, Lord, ask for your forgiveness. We want to ask, Father, that you help us. Lord, whether we're female or male, but particularly if we're male, help us to consider how we treat the women in our lives, how we subtly control and manipulate them. Even today, under the cloak of what we might call equality, or offering them a helping hand. Father, please be with us and open our eyes. We want to thank you for your goodness and mercy towards us, and whatever position we hold within this movement, I want to offer a special blessing to those people, particularly to those in leadership positions. Father, I pray particularly for our sisters in leadership positions, that those people who are supposed to look up to them, who are the flocks of those female leaders, that they will recognize the difficult work that each of them is confronted with, both on a personal and an organizational level. Father, I want to pray for all the brothers who are in leadership positions. Help them, Lord, to really examine how they conduct themselves, how they interact with both their fellow female leaders and those leaders that are above them, and also the sisters who are beneath them in an organizational capacity. Lord, may each of us understand how headship continues to shape and mold our theology and the way we bring up our families and how we interact with one another, with brethren and sisters. Please guide us and direct us, Father, on an individual and a corporate level, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.